I had always considered myself a loving, supportive husband to Sarah. We met in college, fell in love quickly, and got married soon after graduation. Our relationship was strong, built on trust, respect, and shared dreams for the future. I thought nothing could break us apart. But everything changed when Jake entered our lives. Jake was the kind of man who commanded attention. He was confident, charismatic, and had a certain charm that seemed to draw people in, especially Sarah. She met him through her work at a fitness center where Jake worked as a personal trainer. At first, I didn't think much of it. I knew Sarah was just trying to get in better shape and was enjoying the training sessions. But as time passed, I began noticing subtle shifts in her behavior. She seemed more distant, less interested in our nightly conversations, and increasingly absorbed in her phone. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. It wasn't until one evening that everything came crashing down. I came home early from work one day and found Sarah's phone buzzing nonstop on the kitchen counter. I glanced at the screen, expecting to see a message from one of her friends. Instead, it was from Jake. The messages were flirty, borderline suggestive, and showed a level of intimacy I wasn't comfortable with. There was no mistaking it. Sarah and Jake had crossed a line. My heart sank, and anger surged through me. I confronted her that night. She tried to deny it at first, but the truth spilled out. She admitted that Jake had been pursuing her for months, and she had been torn between loyalty to our marriage and the excitement Jake offered. She confessed that she had been emotionally and physically involved with him for weeks. I was devastated. I loved Sarah deeply, but Jake had somehow wormed his way into her heart, and she had allowed it. What hurt the most was that Jake didn't just want an affair, he wanted to take her from me. He had made it clear that he was after more than just a casual fling. Jake wanted to steal Sarah and humiliate me in the process. He saw me as weak, the man in the background, someone he could easily dominate. He enjoyed watching me suffer, relishing every moment of control he had over my wife. For a long time, I was paralyzed by the pain. I wanted to fight back, but I didn't know how. Then one evening, I got a call from one of my close friends, Mark. He knew something was off and had been following the situation closely. He reminded me that I still had the power to turn the tables. And that's when the idea hit me. I wasn't going to let Jake get away with this. I wasn't going to let him humiliate me, and I wasn't going to let Sarah destroy our life together, without consequences. I started making a plan, keeping my emotions in check, and slowly putting my revenge into motion. I began by pretending to accept Sarah's betrayal. I told her that I needed time to think, to reflect on our relationship. Meanwhile, I reached out to Jake, pretending that I was willing to reconcile with him and that I would let go of the whole affair. I knew Jake was confident, almost arrogant, in his belief that he had won. That was his mistake. I started to subtly leak information to Sarah about the affair, things that only Jake and I knew. I made sure that she could never look at him the same way again. She was disgusted by the lies he had told her, the manipulations he had used. But I didn't stop there. I had access to some of Jake's personal information, and I used it to expose him in the worst possible way. I sent incriminating evidence to his gym, anonymously. I knew the consequences would be severe. Jake's reputation was everything to him. Within days, rumors of his infidelity and unethical behavior spread like wildfire. His clients turned against him, and the gym was forced to take action. Jake lost everything. Meanwhile, I began to rebuild my relationship with Sarah, but this time, the dynamic had shifted. Sarah realized the gravity of her actions and how easily she had been manipulated by Jake. The guilt weighed heavily on her. She tried to apologize, but I was no longer the man she had left behind. I had transformed. I had reclaimed my strength and dignity. Jake, on the other hand, was left with nothing. His career crumbled, and he became a shadow of the man he once was. I had humiliated him in the same way he had tried to humiliate me, and it felt like sweet, vindictive justice. I had not only won back my wife's trust, but had shown her that I was a force to be reckoned with. In the end, Sarah and I worked through our issues, though things were never quite the same. The betrayal was too deep to ignore, and the scars would remain. But I had exacted my revenge, and I had proved that no one could steal what was mine without facing the consequences. Jake may have tried to steal my wife and humiliate me, but in the end, I was the one who came out on top. As time passed, the weight of everything that had happened began to settle. While Sarah and I were attempting to heal from the scars left by her betrayal, there was an underlying tension. The trust we had once shared had been shattered, and it wasn't something that could be easily fixed. But the truth was, I wasn't the same man I had been before. The anger, the humiliation, and the revenge had changed me. I had become someone different, someone more resilient, more aware of my own worth. Sarah, too, seemed to recognize the shift. She wasn't the same woman either. She had once thought she could play both sides, thinking that she could indulge in excitement with Jake while still holding on to the comfort and stability I offered. But the fallout had changed her perception. She had learned the hard way that the grass wasn't always greener on the other side, and the consequences of her actions were more than just the emotional damage they had caused. We began counseling, trying to piece together what was left of our marriage. But in the back of my mind, I was always aware of the undercurrent of power I now held. I wasn't the passive, trusting husband anymore. I had become someone capable of taking control, even if it meant going to extreme lengths. I wasn't afraid to stand up for myself anymore. And then came the final test. A few months after everything settled, I received a call from an unknown number. When I picked up, I was surprised to hear a familiar voice. It was Jake. His tone was different now, desperate, almost pleading. He was asking me for help. He had lost his job, his reputation was in tatters, and his social media accounts had been hacked and flooded with negative posts, all thanks to the anonymous leaks I had orchestrated. Jake was clearly at his lowest point. The alpha, confident man who had once belittled me was now broken. He tried to paint a picture of remorse, claiming that he had been used and manipulated by people he had trusted. He even expressed regret over his actions with Sarah, though his words rang hollow. I could hear the desperation in his voice, but I knew better than to trust him again. This wasn't about saving him. This was about me finally closing the chapter. I could have ignored his call, blocked him, or let the past stay buried. But I decided to make a statement, once and for all. I told him that I didn't owe him anything and that he had already received what he deserved. I reminded him that his actions had led to his downfall and that he had underestimated me. I could hear the frustration in his voice as he tried to get me to reconsider, but I held firm. I wasn't about to let him manipulate me again. Then I ended the call. Just like that. No more second chances, no more games. I had exacted my revenge, and in doing so, I had not only reclaimed my dignity, but I had also closed the door on that chapter of my life. As for Sarah, she and I slowly started to rebuild our relationship, but there was an unspoken understanding between us. We knew that the road to healing would be long and difficult, but it wasn't impossible. We had both learned valuable lessons about ourselves, about our marriage, and about the consequences of betrayal. I wasn't the same man who had once been humiliated by Jake's actions. I had reclaimed my power, and in the process, I had learned to protect myself from anyone who thought they could take advantage of me again. Jake had tried to steal my wife and humiliate me, but in the end, it was he who lost everything. And I was the one who walked away with my head held high. As weeks turned into months, I began to realize that the experience with Sarah, Jake, and the emotional chaos had changed me in ways I hadn't anticipated. For so long, I had lived with a mindset of reclaiming control, first through revenge, then through rebuilding trust with Sarah. But somewhere along the way, I started to let go of the need for constant dominance, power struggles, and the weighing of old hurts. I began to focus more on healing, on cultivating a new relationship with myself. In the quiet moments, away from the emotional intensity of the past, I reflected on the person I had become. I was no longer just a man trying to protect his ego and pride from the betrayal of a woman he loved. I was someone who had been broken and rebuilt, someone who had experienced the full depth of pain and was now learning to release it. Revenge, once a driving force, had lost its grip on me. I could breathe without the weight of it hanging over my shoulders. Sarah noticed the shift in me as well. I wasn't the cold, distant man I had been during the months of our rebuilding. I wasn't the man who constantly checked her every move, watched her every word. I had learned to trust again, not just her, but myself. It wasn't perfect, and there were still scars from the betrayal that lingered, but I was no longer defined by them. It was around this time that Sarah and I had another candid conversation. She admitted that she, too, had been struggling with her own demons. The guilt, the shame, the fear of losing me, it had all been overwhelming for her. But she had also come to realize that she couldn't continue to live in the past. She had to find her own peace, just as I had found mine. We agreed to take things day by day. We weren't rushing into anything, not trying to force a return to the way things used to be. We were both different people, and the relationship we had once known couldn't be reassembled like a broken vase. Instead, we focused on forging something new, rooted in honesty and understanding. We began to date again, but this time, it wasn't about the roles we used to play. It was about rediscovering who we were together now, after everything that had happened. Meanwhile, Jake's presence in my life began to feel increasingly irrelevant. It was as if he had faded into the background, no longer a part of my story. He had been the catalyst for everything, the affair, the betrayal, the revenge, but he had also been a mirror reflecting my own insecurities and fears. In the end, he was a footnote in a chapter that no longer held power over me. He did try to reach out once more, but it was a hollow attempt. He sent a message through social media, asking if we could talk and clear the air. I knew exactly what he was trying to do. He wanted validation, a way to make himself feel less guilty about the way things had turned out. But I was done with him. I deleted the message without responding, knowing that whatever he had to say didn't matter anymore. The time for closure had passed. I had already moved on. A few months later, Sarah and I went on a weekend getaway to a cabin by a lake. It was a quiet, peaceful time, a break from the chaos we had endured. As we sat by the fire that evening, wrapped in blankets, I realized something. I wasn't just moving on from the past. I was evolving. The pain, the hurt, the anger, all of it had been a part of me, but it didn't define me anymore. I had learned how to embrace the unknown, how to trust not just in others, but in myself. Sarah looked at me across the fire, her eyes soft but full of emotion. She reached out, took my hand, and said, "I'm so sorry for what I did, for everything. But I want you to know that I love you. I'm grateful for everything we've gone through, because it's brought us to where we are now. And I'm here, with you, every step of the way." I squeezed her hand, not with the same urgency or bitterness that I might have before, but with a sense of calm. I nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle in my chest. "I love you, too," I said. "And I'm glad we're here." We both understood that the road we had walked together was not a straight path. It was filled with twists, turns, and unexpected hurdles. But it had also been a road of growth, of transformation, of learning who we truly were, individually and as a couple. The scars would always remain, but they were no longer wounds. They were part of the story we now shared. And, in the end, that was the true revenge. Not in destroying Jake, not in humiliating him or even reclaiming my place in Sarah's life, but in finding peace within myself. I had been tested, broken, and remade. And through it all, I had learned the most valuable lesson of all, that true strength comes from within, not from taking revenge, but from letting go and embracing the future. Jake had tried to steal my wife and humiliate me, but in the end, it was I who had walked away victorious, not because of the destruction I had caused, but because of the quiet, powerful healing that had occurred within me.